I just wanted a conversation around what is mainstream, what is not mainstream, and how do we get our high performance buildings within the mainstream.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand, and joined this week again by Zach Simke. How you going, Zach?
I'm doing great. I'm calling in from Hollywood, which is really fun.
Nice.
I'm here with my family for a couple days. It's been a lot of fun.
Enjoying some sunshine there?
Indeed. It's great.
And we're also welcoming back Mary James. How are you, Mary?
Very good.
And you brought us a great interview this week, which we're going to get into with someone who's very active in the scene and maybe a familiar voice to some people who have followed Passive House Accelerator and Reimagine for a little while. And we're going to be diving into retrofits, which is something that I think we're all a bit passionate about, and certainly our guest is as well. But before we do that, we've got a few people to thank, Zach.
We do indeed. So a big thank you to our Accelerator Partner of the Week, Curtis and Ginsberg Architects. And Curtis and Ginsberg is making everything possible here for us this week at Passive House Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast. Thank you too to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thank you to our champion sponsors, Buizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, Icon Windows and Doors, Intis Windows, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, Proseco, Source 2050, and Zender.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's get stuck straight in because I think Nidhi Shah, who is your guest this week, Mary, does a very good job. You introduce her very well in the interview. So let's jump right in and we'll catch up afterwards.
Welcome, Nidhi Shah, to the Passive House podcast. And you're a certified Passive House designer and retrofit specialist, and you're also a member of the Reimagine Buildings Collective. I wanted to talk with you about a series that you recently initiated for the collective. Before we get into that, let's just talk a little bit about your background. How did you initially get interested in high performance building?
Way back. Actually, it was my first job in the UK. I was always interested in sort of sustainability and stuff like that. And kind of growing up in India, I was kind of very, very aware of sort of resource limitations and how that kind of impacted high performance building over there. I mean, at that time, this is late 90s, early 2000s, you couldn't find proper insulation products over there, or air tightness was never heard of. I never learned sustainability or high performance building when I was going through my own architectural course over there in mid 90s. So it's kind of, but I kind of knew that there was things happening and I wanted to be sustainable and use natural materials. Using natural materials was kind of quite easy over there. So I kind of got interested in earth building and took a trip down to Pondicherry and Oroville and saw what was happening over there. And that was kind of quite eye-opening in a way. And then I came to UK, and my first job in UK was sort of a research associate type of it was a knowledge transfer partnership at the time it was called, and it was between a social housing provider and the university, and my role was to kind of investigate how to create housing that was suitable for the diversity, like diverse ethnic groups and things like that, and kind of how it was the modern housing suitable for them, how to kind of create a new housing typology for that kind of group. And then one of the requirements, and this was like in the long list of requirements for that particular research post. One was that it should be sustainable. And that was it. It's like just one line that it should be sustainable. But that kind of got me thinking about what sustainability meant. And I was looking at what was available in UK at the time. And this is back in 2008, 2009. And then there was something called Code for Sustainable Homes. And I kind of went and did that training. And it's during that training, I learned about Passive House and the German standard. And it was still early days in UK as well for Passive House, like back in 2008. And it's like people were just about starting to talk about it. It was really early days. And I'm like, I want to become a Passive House designer. So through that research post, I'm like, I really want to become a passive house designer. That's the only way you can create sustainable housing in UK. It's like that's it. And then so I got that training approved, and I was in the first batch of the English language training in UK that happened. And that was kind of it got me. It was really hard for me. I kind of had never studied building physics before, and it was like
Crash course.
it was, yeah. Every single day was a struggle, but I passed the course and I worked really hard for it. And it's kind of, I've never stopped learning since then. It's like constant process of learning. It's like every single day.
And part of your constant learning, I guess, is that you've developed a specialty in retrofits. And can you tell us how that came to be? And I guess most recently, when you were in the UK, you were working for Retrofit Action for Tomorrow. If you could tell us a little bit about what that organization does.
Yeah, sure. So again, I'm kind of going back to during my course. When I did the Passive House Designer course, I came across Association of Environment Conscious Buildings. So I kind of joined that.
Which is an organization in the UK.
In the UK, yes.
Probably many of our listeners are not familiar with. So can you just briefly tell us about that organization?
Sure. So Association of Environment Conscious Buildings been around for over 30 years now. So it's kind of started in early 90s. So and at AECB we kind of focus on building this knowledge and kind of bringing everybody up to skill in terms of high performance building. AECB brought the Passive House standard to UK as well. So Passive House Trust is sort of a sister organization or a baby organization in a way. So it was set up by AECB initially and then kind of separated as a separate organization in its own strength. But joining AECB, so it's a group of like-minded people. It's a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. So a lot of them are trades. So kind of, they actually came from like building, actual building kind of. They were contractors or bricklayers or joiners and things like that. And so they were actually on the ground building this and kind of interested in the high performance building standard. And it was kind of a different way of looking at it. Once I kind of joined, I started learning a lot more from them in a way. It's kind of from the peers and from everybody around me. It's like, oh my gosh, you can do this, and oh my gosh, you can do that, and it's like, oh, why are we building it like this? Like, why aren't we kind of putting the best practice into in making that mainstream? So my whole focus was like, oh, how do I get this into mainstream? So I became a member. Then I joined the board as well. So I was on the board for quite a few years, and I became a vice chair for AECB as well. So I was kind of bringing more people in, getting involved in conferences, and we were developing standards as well. So there was a whole AECB standard around that that a lot of people in the UK are adopting. So it's a slightly lower than Passive House standard, but you can still get a very good high performing building. So that kind of through AECB, I kind of met a lot of people, a lot of practitioners, and one of them was Harry Paticus, who was the founder of Retrofit Action for Tomorrow. So I'd met him, and I was put in touch with him just when COVID kind of struck, and all the architectural practices were shutting down in UK because all the projects were kind of, we were like, nobody was going on site, nobody was going on office, and we were sitting at home, and I'm like thinking, what do I do now? And it's like, I was in touch with him, and so just during that COVID time, he was looking for someone who could kind of help him. It was just an idea, the Retrofit Action for Tomorrow at that time. So this is like 5.5 years ago, was literally an idea. He didn't know whether it was going to take off. I wasn't sure what I was joining in. and we were both, but we were kind of aligned in terms of our values and what we wanted to see, and we kind of understood that retrofit is where we wanted to make an impact in a way. It's kind of, we already have all the buildings that we need. Like we keep hearing people saying things like this, like 90% of buildings that are going to be there in 100 years are already there. That sort of, or in 2050 is already there. And we need to bring the we need to make existing buildings better in a way. And there were a lot of other things as well. So around that time coming out of in UK, so there were retrofits going wrong. So there were a lot of EWI kind of retrofits that had gone horribly, horribly wrong. So you kind of had stories of people living in really bad retrofits, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. It's like, if you do something really well, and if you understand building physics, and you do, and it's, if it's properly modeled and designed, that shouldn't happen. So there was lots of different threads that were kind of converging at that point for me as well. It's like asking those questions, trying to make everything mainstream, but also kind of looking at the mainstream and saying, why is retrofit getting such a bad name? Why is things going so wrong? That sort of, and
Right. There was even a recent study still that,
yeah,
what was it? Something like 90% of the retrofits that have been funded by the UK government
yeah.
have issues, or issues of mold or.
Yeah. So retrofits have always been badly funded. I mean, there has been money, they've thrown money at it, but it's always been badly funded in a way. So in terms of criteria and stuff like that, so you're kind of just doing EWI, but then there is no,
Wait, EWI?
external wall insulation. And there were a lot of providers who kind of just came in and they're like, oh, we'll come and do external wall insulation on you. But there was no analysis done of the property, whether it was right for the property, whether what the details were, whether what the junctions were, whether the roof was okay. So it's like the whole building approach was never present, basically. And that kind of, it was really badly done. There have been separate programs for just putting air source heat pumps in, or just putting PVs in. So there is a lot of money being thrown at this, but it's not a whole building approach, and that is why it kind of keeps going wrong and wrong. I know you have a badly leaky building, and you're putting with a very high peak load, and you put an air source heat pump in. It's never going to meet the heating demand of that building, and it's going to run and run and run, and probably stop working at some point.
And cost a fortune.
Exactly, cost a fortune. So we've had those kind of stories as well. The people who put air source heat pump in, and they're paying 5 times of their energy bills, and you're like, no wonder, because you haven't done what you should have done to make your building air source heat pump ready in the first place. So there were all these ideas that were kind of around, but I think we kind of, at the time, I mean, I knew about all these things, but I kind of didn't really know how to channel it into a single message and kind of bring that out. And I think that's kind of where joining with Harry, he's kind of a really good visionary as well. So even though he set up RAFT, and he didn't know where we would end up 5 years down the line, he had this vision that this is what we need to do, and we need to upskill people. We need to kind of engage with community. We need to engage with children, and it kind of started off with that, and we need to do the retrofit properly. We need to kind of have a whole building approach, and we need to, and I was like, suddenly I'm like, yeah, this is the answer. This is kind of what I have been struggling with and not found a way to channel it myself, but here it was all laid out in front of me, and I could see it work, and so I kind of joined him. And apart from him, it was just me for like, I think 4 or 5 months in that initial phase, and we were kind of, there was no funding, so it was like, I don't really know if I can keep you employed, so it was literally a month on month kind of thing. Okay, actually I can manage next month, and so he was taking a very big risk on me and employing me, and I was taking a huge risk in terms of career and everything. I was like, I don't really know where this is going to end up. There was no job security, nothing around that. But we kind of had this shared vision, and I was like, this is what I want to do, kind of thing. So I just went all in, and it kind of paid off as well. So we kind of did. Well, it paid off in the sense that we were able to, with a couple of our clients, local authority councils. And because RAFT was set up as a not-for-profit organization, and Harry set it up as that because he could see that there was some public funding, but as an architectural practice, we could never access that public funding. But if we were set up as a not-for-profit entity and not-for-profit shareholder, not for shareholder profit kind of entity, we could access some of the funding and we could help our clients. So we were then seeking clients at local authorities and public bodies that could access those fundings that we were kind of coming across and then kind of sharing with them. So there was a lot of work that we did, like without getting paid as well. We were like, okay, we can actually do a sort of energy analysis for you. And the funding was also like, I wouldn't say funny, but obviously the criteria were where you had to kind of show certain amount of energy reduction or certain amount of carbon reduction, so it was like whole pound per ton of carbon saved and pound per ton of lifetime carbon saved. So we were kind of suddenly getting into those kind of calculations as well. So we had to kind of upskill or ourselves in a way. So I had to learn about all these things, like whole
On
carbon.
embodied carbon calculations, you mean?
No, operational carbon. So this is all
this is all
operational.
operational carbon.
This is all operational. So nobody was talking about embodied at all, but it's like operational carbon, and it was whole lifetime carbon. So it's like in the lifetime of that retrofit. So if we were kind of putting a measure in, so if I said if I wanted to do cavity wall insulation in this particular building, then I had to kind of show them that I was saving this much carbon in that lifetime of that particular measure. And all the measures were defined with their lifetime defined as well. So it's like cavity wall insulation had 27 years of lifetime, or something else would have 10 years of lifetime. Like windows were really hard to get in, or MVHR was really hard to get in because MVHR apparently had 7 years of lifetime attached to it. So you had to show the amount of carbon it saved in that 7 years. So it was providing that value in a very short space of time.
Without looking at the health advantages.
No. That was never a criteria. The criteria was very simple. It was like cut and dry. It's like pounds per lifetime carbon saved. So when we first started back in 2020, it was still very generous, and it's called public sector decarbonization schemes. And it was still very generous. It was like £500 per ton of carbon saved or something. We could get few measures in, and if you kind of combine certain measures in a certain way, you could kind of get a low performing measure in because you had something else which was like really high performing or something like that. So you could kind of do that. But it's like putting a whole puzzle together. And I think in the 5 years that I was there, I got really good at that. It's like, okay, we need to this building will work if we do this and this measure, that sort of stuff. But that pound per lifetime carbon saved kept decreasing as well. It went down to 425 pounds per ton of carbon saved. And last it was, I think, 325 pounds per ton of carbon saved. So while construction was getting more and more expensive, the money available to do measures was reducing from the government, so it was like getting harder and harder to get measures through. But I think it was a really good experience in that sense that like I got really good at looking at different types of buildings and very quickly making that judgment of, okay, with this building we can do this and we can kind of get it through, and that whole value kind of cost benefit and value judgment and that sort of it kind of honed in on that. But anyway, I'm digressing too far out, isn't it?
No. So the focus became more really on decarbonization of
Exactly. Yeah. It was more about decarbonizing then. Yeah, which is kind of where so I've talked about in the Reimagine Collective, the whole life carbon study that we did, and it's like embodied carbon and operational carbon combined, and that kind of became the pivotal thing because we were struggling with this. We can't get deep. We could never get deep retrofit or NFIT kind of buildings through the funding mechanism that was available. But we still wanted to do good retrofit. We wanted to have a whole building approach, it's kind of, so how kind of we do that and what kind of decisions are we making and what is the cost of it and what is the whole life carbon cost of certain measures, that kind of questioning, all that kind of stuff. We kind of honed in on, okay, we want to decarbonize, but we couldn't kind of leave our public sector clients, which were mainly schools or libraries or museum buildings or some organizations or public bodies that are already really cash strapped and have no further sort of leeway of on kind of paying high operational energy costs, right? So it's kind of what we want to decarbonize, and you can put an air so electrify everything and you're decarbonized, but you kind of want to do it in a sensible, sort of realistic kind of way. So you want to kind of make sure that you reduce the demand. You've kind of selected the measures that are going to reduce the demand and are good for occupant health and well-being. And so that's not getting affected either. And you're kind of reducing the peak heat load to the point where you kind of can get you can electrify the building and then make still everything still makes sense. That kind of, yeah, my work at RAFT was mostly that. It was like trying to solve a big puzzle for each and every building.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like your focus was on reducing peak heating load, and I didn't hear you mention reducing peak cooling load. Is that because students are out of school in the summertime and so it's not as much of a
Yeah,
concern?
very good point. I think, yeah, we would, I mean, in certain cases, we did look at peak cooling load where the buildings were going to be open. But in terms of schools, peak cooling load, overheating was becoming an issue, and we were kind of very conscious of it. But we weren't looking at cooling because it was still heating dominated climate in a way, and cooling outside on that shoulder seasons of summer holidays or stuff like that was or is an issue, and it's going to become more and more of an issue. But what we found was kind of passive measures were low cost and actually better at keeping that sort of the need for cooling away in a way, so you didn't need to kind of have mechanical cooling in it if you put external shades or if you used your building in a certain way. It's like you have your MVHR, you can do this with it. You can keep the MVHR running, you can have external shades, you can still use it to kind of maintain that sort of comfort level within that shoulder seasons as well.
And just for those who don't know what MVHR, it's mechanical ventilation with heat recovery.
Yeah, sorry about all the acronyms. I
It's
think we kind of
okay.
it's just full of it, isn't it? It's good.
Always. So I wonder how you heard about the Reimagine Buildings Collective and what got you interested in joining.
So I'm one of the founder members of the Reimagine Collective. I think I kind of came across it through Passive House Accelerator because I think it was kind of being advertised here that I'm kind of subscribed to it, so I kind of get the emails as well. So I kind of started looking at it. I thought that sounds like fun. And also I kind of knew that I was going to eventually move to America. So it's kind of, I was like, oh, what's happening? I was very conscious about what was or wanted to be conscious about and know more about what was happening in America in a way. So that was one of the motivator, and it's actually kind of been a little bit more because I've learned so much from the collective in a way. So it's broadened my kind of horizons as well, and kind of, yeah.
Could you give me an example of how it's broadened your horizons?
There are things that I kind of still sort of struggle with as well, and I found people who had the answers that I was looking for. Is a better way of putting it. I was struggling with services a lot, and I found people who kind of have helped me understand services better, mechanical service, like not just the NVHR, but the air source heat pump side of it, the heating side of it, the cooling side of it. And I still struggle with all our assumptions around hot water usage in building and how to design it better and things like that. So like when you like really hone into your high performance building, you've got a high performance building, your heating load is down. Suddenly your peak heating load is down and suddenly your hot water is more than 50% of your energy consumption. It's like, oh my gosh, now I need to look at my hot water. So I always struggle with that, but it's through Reimagine Buildings Collective that I met people who were also kind of looking into it. It's like, okay, now what shall we do? Now hot water is the bigger problem. So what do we do about that? So it's like I knew some things about building performance and I could kind of create a very high performing building, but then there were all the things around it. Once you've got a fairly high performing building envelope, It's like what everything else that you need to like then look at, it's like how are you getting your EVs in, how are you getting your PVs in, it's like how is the whole system then working, with the services. It's kind of what I've learned from the collective, or I'm still learning. I don't know if I've got all the answers, but
I imagine in schools, hot water demand really wasn't a huge issue.
no, it was a very huge issue. So the consumption is not an issue. I think the issue is around assumptions. So we're still designing systems based on assumptions. I mean, somebody explained it to me the other day. It's like a lot of these assumptions are post-war, so they're late 40s, early 50s, where nobody had heard of a low flow tap, where nobody had heard of insulation on pipework. It's that. So we are still designing systems that are like maybe 10 times bigger in size than they need to be. So it's like hot water usage per child. It's like a totally different era. There was a time when children only bathed in school, and having shower provision in school was a big thing. Now nobody bathes in school. It's like even after doing a whole day of sports, they don't. They go home and have a shower. So that whole provision of hot water is still a very big issue. And I think a lot of assumptions around it. It's like we need to challenge it. I mean, we can't change it because it's built into the regulations, but it's like, which just means that we are oversizing our systems constantly, and we're heating that much water daily up to a certain degrees to avoid the Legionnaire, that sort of Legionnaire risk or
Right.
something like that. So it's like, yeah, you've got an 800-liter tank that you're heating up to 62 degrees every single day. I'm sorry, centigrade. So I'm not talking in Fahrenheit. I'm using, when I'm talking in numbers, I'm using metric numbers and not
Right.
the imperial numbers. So I'm sorry about that. But yeah,
What an energy hog.
exactly. Yeah. So and the moment you've got a very high performing building, the hot water is like, oh my God, it's 50 to 60 or to 70% of your usage. So the hot water usage currently would be like really small. So even when I'm looking at existing buildings and I'm modeling it, and suddenly through the model, I'm like, okay, the building is fairly good performing. Why is the hot water usage 25% or 50%? And you're like, is there a hot water leak somewhere? Because that's just like why, you kind of look at all these things and you kind of kind of can see the whole story, because the buildings tell the story in a way by just looking at their energy data and the way the energy is being used.
So within the Reimagine Buildings Collective, you've decided to initiate a series focused on sharing design details. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to start the series and what you hope it's going to accomplish?
I started it on LinkedIn, I think, and I just wanted a conversation around what is mainstream, what is not mainstream, and how do we get our high performance buildings within the mainstream. And one way of doing that was, let's do some posts on LinkedIn and see how it lands. And it got quite a good traction, and a lot of people were engaging with it, and I kind of felt quite encouraged by it as well. And it's like it is actually starting the conversation we need. And I was talking to Zach from Reimagine Buildings about it, and he's also seeing the post, and he's like, this is really good. This is what we need within the collective as well. It's like, and that this is kind of what I was hoping that the conversation within the collective would be as well. It's like, this is what I've done, this is what I've learned. It's like, what do other people think? Is there a better way of doing it? There's always a better way of doing it. There's not one way to kind of reach the goal anyway. And it's like,
Especially in retrofits.
exactly, yeah. And I just kind of was curious about what other people were doing and how they were doing it. And you come across it in bits and pieces in conferences, but it's kind of never that very clear. It's like there's always a lot of questions. And I just kind of wanted to start that conversation so that we can all learn from each other in a way. So, and I think we are doing that. So,
Yes, well, you just hosted the first in the series, and there was a
Mhm.
really great response. A lot of people came. And do you want to talk a little bit more about what happened in the episode? I think it was, as you said, a really great example of sharing knowledge and
Yeah.
people getting very practical information and discussing resources. But I want to hear your take on it.
So yeah, I mean, I was actually very scared about hosting it. I was like, I'm not an expert. I don't want to kind of come across as like, oh, when we called it was a tongue-in-cheek thing as well. It's like we called it no regrets details. And I was thinking about it last night, and I'm like, I don't have all the answers. I'm sure there are other people who've done better than what I've done. I've done certain things, and I want to share it with people. And it's like, and you talk to people and they're like, oh, did you do it this way? Oh, how did that work out? How did this work out? So it's just, I just wanted to kind of start that conversation. So I was really scared to host it today, but I think, like you said, a lot of people came. It was really encouraging, and a lot of people had not just positive comments, but it generated, I think, a very informed discussion, and I think that's kind of what I really liked about it. Is was that it wasn't just, oh, why did you do this or why did you do that kind of stuff, but around, oh, okay, is that how moisture travels, or what are the risks around this sort of detailing, or that I thought it was a very well-informed conversation, and I hope that we can continue that in future series as well, in future episodes of that series. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, as Zach said, this is exactly the kind of session that he wanted to see when he started the collective. And because everyone was sharing their expertise
Yeah.
and, as you said, having a very well-informed conversation. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. It was really valuable. So I'm hoping that it continues. And I think Reimagine Buildings has been very valuable resource in a way. So it's a great platform.
Yes, and I'm sure everyone's looking forward to the next session, which I guess you're going to hold them once a month. Is that?
That's the plan. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to quickly mention that you started with these 6-point basic rules about retrofits, which I thought were really great. And one of the points that I thought was really interesting was the retrofit sooner rather than later in your 6-point plan. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Ah, thank you for asking that. Yeah. So at RAFT, I mean, like I said, we've done quite a bit of research. And one particular research was this whole life carbon study of the 5 schools that we were working with at the time. And in every school that we analyzed, we realized we were analyzing the 5 scenarios, like do nothing, or if you just put the air source heat pump in it, what happens? Or if you do a light retrofit, what happens? Or if you did a whole deep retrofit, what happens? If you did deep retrofit in phases, what happens? And if you do like whole demolish and rebuild, what happens? And we were looking at the whole life carbon. So we were looking at embodied energy, and we were looking at the operational carbon as well associated with that. And we were looking at 60-year time frame. And in that 60-year time frame, and one thing that kept coming in each and every example that we looked at was that retrofitting now gave us the best result. Retrofit, even phased retrofit starting now gave us a better result than any of the other scenarios. And if we waited, so in a couple of scenarios, then we looked at, oh, what if we wait for 10 years and then do a retrofit after 10 years? And that was actually 5 times more carbon than what it was than even the phased retrofit starting now. It became very clear that actually time is crucial. We have to start now, whether you do, even if you do a light retrofit and electrify, that is going to save more carbon in the long run than waiting 10 years to do a perfect deep retrofit. So it's like, it's where do your, I mean, I'm not saying that all the buildings should have light retrofit and an air source heat pump, but it kind of generated a conversation for me as well, and for everybody else around me as well. It's like different buildings, different types of things. Not everything needs to be an effort, but we need to start doing something to every building now itself, and kind of trying to electrify them, make them comfortable as well. So obviously health and comfort is something we want to kind of look at as well. So it's not like just putting air source heat pump on a leaky building, but it's kind of, it was really revealing the whole calculations, and what was coming out of this calculation is like, start doing something now. Let's not wait kind of thing. Waiting is actually much more, because we're going to spend a lot more in operational carbon.
Great. Well, that is a great note to end on. And I'm really looking forward to the next session.
Thank you so much.
And that was Nidhi Shah talking with Mary James. Mary, let's go to you first. What were your takeaways from that interview?
Well, there was something that she said that Nidhi said right at the very beginning of the interview that I thought was it's sort of indicative of her career path, which is that she jumped in and was in the first batch of the English language passive house training in the
Mm,
UK, and that she's never stopped learning since. And
yeah.
clearly, it's her character that she has brought that to each of her positions that she's had and really dives into the topics and shares that information well with other people as she's doing now on the Reimagine Buildings Collective. So it's
Yeah.
I thought that was sort of noteworthy.
Yeah, I love that idea of continual learning, and she's obviously bringing that, like you say, and really open to, well, encouraging others to be open, as we often talk about in passive house circles, that people are willing to share stories about what went well, but also what went not so well, and to help other people avoid mistakes, but also learning about things that are emerging, and I guess they could be seen as unintended consequences, or just things to think about before, the sequencing of things. Like she mentioned about getting a house air source heat pump ready, which I hadn't heard of as a term before, but it totally makes sense that you can just whack a heat pump into a building, but you're not necessarily going to get the efficiencies from that if you don't do some of the draft proofing, and you close up some of the gaps first, because then you're just not going to get any of that benefit. And I think we see that quite often when people put in something that is in theory a lot more efficient into an older building, but their power bill doesn't necessarily change, and there are various factors going on there as well because they've got different expectations, but it may not be optimized, or things aren't set up properly to do that. And obviously, yeah, to your point, continuing that learning about how to do these things is a really important aspect of that. Something I wanted to pick up from you, Mary, you mentioned about that statistic, which I found quite scary. About 90% of retrofits in the UK had gone wrong. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, there was an article earlier this year, but it's been a trend, and I should have been more specific. It's retrofits with external wall insulation.
Right.
This program that there was funding for in the UK. And but unfortunately, as Nidhi talks about, there just wasn't any sort of analyses done on these buildings. These companies sprang up and just slapped on external wall insulation and
Yeah.
often created, as we know, common problems like mold, condensation issues by doing that without looking at the whole building.
Yeah.
And it is shocking what a high percentage of the buildings have had problems.
Yeah, it is shocking. And I'm struggling a little bit. Well, haven't tried I've tried a few avenues, but I'd really like to get more builders to put some monitoring equipment in, or to it's quite hard to know what's happening inside walls until something goes really, really badly, or until someone pulls the building apart. And I know that there are a few people who really deep dive and get quite nerdy and putting sensors inside walls, but I'd love for more people to do that, or to even to hear about people that are doing that, so that we've got more in real life information about what's going on out there, because we've got woofy models and we've got lots of theories, and we know that there's highly likely condensation occurring inside walls, particularly when we muck around with air tightness and don't have all those components working together well. But it's really hard to know what's going on in real world conditions until it becomes really obvious, and then it's way too late. But it's a really hard thing to do, because I think a lot of builders are quite nervous about what might happen if they have that level of transparency in what they're actually building. yeah, so that's an area that I'm personally quite interested in continuing to explore. Zach, what was all your highlights?
Well, I appreciated, Mary, that you brought up the study that Nidhi and RAFT did on, finding that it's important not to wait to make our buildings better. And that she did a great presentation about just that. And we'll include a link to the study so people can take a look at those findings. Really interesting. Kind of, there were four different cases, like approaches to retrofit that she and Raft evaluated. So really interesting findings. I've known Nidhi now for well over a year. She's been, as she mentioned, she's been one of the founding members of the Reimagine Buildings Collective. And so I've gotten to know her, but I hadn't heard the full kind of story of how she got involved in Raft and kind of how she got involved in Passive House in the first place. So it was really fun to hear that story. And I mean, I think you alluded to this, Mary, but the what she's doing with the details series in the collective is exactly why we started the collective in the first place. It's this idea that we need to have a forum and a place for practitioners to share with one another, and the successes to emulate and the pitfalls to avoid. And so it was really, really fun to be part of that first session of her No Regrets Details series. And when we do events announcements, I'll share when the next one is coming, because there's another one coming up soon.
Nice. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you very much, Mary. Really great to hear from inspiring people like that. And yeah, as you say, continue learning for Nidhi, but also encouraging others to continue to learn as well and develop. So thank you very much. Yeah, you mentioned some good, exciting stuff coming up, Zach. Lots more to check out over at Reimagine.
Yes, that's right. Maybe I'll do this in chronological order, starting with Passive House Accelerator in terms of events. So this week on Wednesday, which is Earth Day, April 22nd, we're joined by Proseco for a special component spotlight. This one is going to be about, well, the title is, Do You Know What's in Your Low Carbon Cement? So it's going to be diving into the chemistry and kind of the key things you need to know as you are working to specify low carbon cement and reduce the carbon impact of the cement that you're using and the concrete. So again, April 22nd, join the Passive House Accelerator live for that. Then within the Reimagine Buildings Collective, I promised I'd share when Nidhi's next No Regrets Details event is, and that is on May 12th at noon Eastern. So in order to join that, you can join the Reimagine Buildings Collective. This is our membership community. So if you go to reimaginebuildings.com, you can become a member, and we'd love to see you in the community and at the details event on May 12th. And then on May 15th, we have another Reimagine Buildings conference. So this is going to be a 4-hour virtual conference, super exciting program and speakers lined up by our producer, Kim Davis. And the title of this is Reimagine Buildings Designing for Survivability. So we'll be looking at all 4 different lenses kind of on survivability and resilience around extreme heat, extreme cold, fire resilience, and the components and building systems and materials that can help build resilience into our buildings. So again, that's on May 15th. So mark your calendar. Registration actually will be open by the time this airs. So go to passivehouseaccelerator.com and register for that.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks again, Mary. And we'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.